Man, this is really something I struggle with. And it's the whole T-shaped theory thing. In some people, it's easier to see than others. And sometimes I just don't see it in some people. It's really hard to identify. Um, it's just one of those things. So and see if I could gain a better understanding of the T-shape and this theory that will help caricature or help us develop our caricatures better. Okay, so this is the head shape. I don't really struggle with the head shape too much. A unique head shape just by starting with the eye line. Where is this guy? Where is it? Okay. Let's just scroll through. Learning to see. That's interesting. Because sometimes you just don't see it. All right, how about I start off just with the basics and then I'll find my way to the T-shape. The three basic relationships in caricature. The relationships between the five shapes are the basis of facial exaggeration in caricature. Fair enough. What does all this have to do with caricature? Everything. I mentioned a single word in the last paragraph that really is the secret to caricature as a whole, no matter what technique or approach you intend to practice. Relationships. If caricature has a secret key, it's understanding relationships. The manipulation of the relationships of the five shapes forms the bedrock of any caricature. In fact, I'd argue that 90% of the caricature resides in how you relate these five simple shapes to one another. These relationships are the foundation upon which the rest of your building is built. Where the real power of exaggeration is realized, make it effective and hopefully dynamic, and almost all the heavy lifting is done. What do I mean by relationships? I mean the distance between the five shapes, their size relative to one another, and the angle they are at in relationship to the central axis of the face. Okay, so the five shapes would be 1, the head shape, 2 and 3 would be your pair of eyes, 4, the nose, and 5, the mouth. So in list form, we have distance between the features. We also have size of features relative to each other, relative to the central axis of the face. These three basic relationships are what is exaggerated among the five shapes to create a caricature. In traditional portraiture, the head is divided into classic proportions. We'll get into that more later. Meaning the features are within a certain accepted distance of one another, as are their size and head shape. You achieve your likeness in a classic portrait in its most basic form by correctly drawing the shapes and then the details of each feature according to the model in front of you, while staying within the framework of these classic proportions. Of course, each face varies minutely here and there, but portraits still do not stray far from the classic formula. In a caricature, like a portrait, the likeness is also achieved by drawing the features as they really look. But you change the relationship of the features based on your perception of the face. Look at the very simple drawing on this page and notice they demonstrate how you can change the relationships of the five shapes to create very different caricatures. Say caricatures contain no detail, and all the shapes used are basically the same with the exception of the head shape. Again, more on that later, much more. But each face is distinctly different. When the details are added, they will make for highly varied caricatures. The difference lies in the relationships between the 5 shapes and how they have been exaggerated, choosing one feature and making it bigger. It's about all the features and how they relate to one another. Above are some quick studies of the 5 shapes as they relate to a few caricature sketches. Okay. We got this guy here. The shapes are overly simplified here so that they all differ primarily only in relationship to one another, namely in terms of distance, size, and angle. The bigger the differences are from classic proportion caricature. It's much easier to see the differences when the details are removed and only the 5 shapes are left. It's also much easier to create those differences at this simple fundamental level. Laying down these basic shapes and their relationships is akin to the blueprint stage of our building. It might not be obvious once the rest of the work is finished, but it's the most crucial stage, and getting it wrong to get caught up in the details, but the important information rests beneath the rendering. One of the most fundamentals of doing caricature is being able to reduce the face to the simplest forms and manipulate them at this base level. After that is accomplished, then you can add the details according to your drawing and rendering style, and of course, according to the specifics of the face in front of you. In this manner, all styles of caricature share a common foundation, the 5 shapes. How does one determine the correct way to change a given person's feature relationships to make a good caricature of them? Well, that's the trick, isn't it? That is where that pesky seeing comes in. In his book, How to Draw Caricatures, Contemporary Books, 1984, Lynn Redmond uses a concept called the in-between. Typical face has the classic portraiture relationship and is used as a point of reference for making observations. Every caricature begins with the observations the artist makes about the subject and how that particular face is perceived. As I mentioned before, this differs among artists, which is what makes caricature such a unique and highly individual artistic expression. Mad Magazine legend Mort Drucker has been known to say that there is no one correct way to caricature a subject. Any given subject can have several different interpretations with respect to the exaggeration of the relationship of their features, and each may be as successful as the other. Portraiture is basically absolute. The drawing either looks like the person with the correct features, but does not. Caricature is subjective to a point. The artist's goal is to draw how he or she perceives the face and to exaggerate that perception. The result may be different than how others perceive that face. But if the 3 elements we described in our definition, recognizability, exaggeration, and statement, are present, it's still a successful caricature. Hirschfeld was heard to say he once drew famous for his huge nose without a nose at all, yet it was still recognizable as Durant. In that case, Hirschfeld made a surprisingly different choice but ended up with a successful caricature despite ignoring his subject's most obvious feature. Okay, I want to skip down, find his T-shape. Recognizing the T-shape created by the eyes and the nose. T-shape theory. I have talked a lot about simplifying the face by boiling it down into the 5 shapes. But it can get even simpler than that in terms of both making observations and playing with the relationships of features to make a caricature. Absolutely crucial key components to any caricature: the head shape and the T shape. I look at these two elements first and try to make observations about them because they allow me to push, stretch, and exaggerate the face to great effect with relative ease. When I talk about the T shape, I am speaking of the geometric shape created by the eyes and the nose as if drawn in contour arms. In simplest terms, they create a capital T. This simple shape describes the relationship between these important facial elements, making it into a single unit. This makes exaggerating the eyes and nose relationship much easier, but you can ignore all the details of the features themselves and concentrate on manipulating just the T shape itself. T time. The relationship of the eyes and nose creates a basic capital T shape that encompasses both elements. By thinking of the eyes and nose as a simple geometric shape, exaggeration can be applied much more easily. Sometimes the T can be short and wide. Sometimes it can be long and thin, in between. The angle at which the eyes rest compared to the central axis of the face can change the T into more of a Y, or alternately more of an arrow shape. I treat the T shape not as a set of simple lines, but as a contoured shape with thickness. The T can be thicker or thinner at either end, and the arms or eyes of the T can also change in thickness to accommodate big round eyes or narrow squinty ones. Imagine a contoured capital T drawn around the eyes and nose in various relationships. The relationship between the eyes and nose in action. Pulling a fast one. One very general relationship rule is between the eyes and nose. Imagine them connected by a pulley system. Going up. As the eyes are pulled apart, the nose is raised closer into the bridge area. Going down. If the eyes are drawn together, the nose gets farther away. The nose, mouth, and chin dynamic is you make in the relationship of the eyes and nose. In most cases, the eyes and nose work in a predictable tandem. Imagine that the eyes and nose are connected by a string that travels through a 2-wheel pulley located directly between the eyes. The length of the string is constant. If a person's eyes are moved further apart, the string pulls the nose upwards, closer to the eye line. If the nose pulls the eyes closer together, all of this takes place within the T shape. The mouth, nose, and chin have a similar connection. The amounts of distance between these features must add up to a constant. If the mouth is perceived as close to the nose, the chin moves a little farther downward as a reaction, and vice versa. This is extreme simplification, but as I have said before, the simpler you can make the shapes you are working to exaggerate them and create your caricature. If you imagine a shape as simple as a T, it becomes very easy to exaggerate that T shape and then plug the features into it. And just like that, you have your caricature. Teeing off. A few caricatures with the T shape and head shape indicated how the simple shapes underneath create strong exaggerations once the details of the face are added on top. So we got Stephen King, we got Macaulay Culkin, and we got Tom Cruise. The T-shape and head shape combine to create the base of your caricature. Over them, the 5 shapes further define the release, and over the 5 shapes, you can add the features themselves. Things like bone structure, anatomy, expression, skin, hair, and other details further work to create the likeness and bring the underlying structure to life. But never forget that it's all built on these simple foundations. I would suggest as an exercise to set aside the notions of rendering and drawing details on caricatures for a moment, and instead fill up a few T-shapes of some faces from a magazine. Draw one quickly using your initial observations and first impressions of the face, then look back at it and try to see where it differs from the normal template of classic proportion. Then try it again, this time exaggerating what you produce in your first try. Do this with a dozen faces a day and watch how your ability to see the caricature in a given face develops. This is a good exercise for any caricaturist, no matter your... All right, so that's really all I wanted to read. And I think I'm going to practice that exercise that he talks about. Fill up a few sketchbook pages with nothing but the head shapes and T shapes of some faces from a magazine. And drawing details. I think I'm going to do that. Draw one quickly using just your initial observations and first impressions of the face. Then look back at it and try to see where it differs from the normal template of classic proportion. Then try it again, this time exaggerating what you produced in your first try. Do this with a dozen faces a day. So there's going to be an A drawing and a B drawing, and we're going to have standard proportion reference. So A and B drawing, we're going to do 12 A and Bs and compare it to we'll call it the C. All right, so that's it, you guys. I hope this was useful. Quick little read on the T-shape, and I'm going to get to that exercise.